For those roles, when they interview you, it's not about like what you've done. Hopefully you have a really public portfolio or network that can vouch for you, and they'll do their due diligence on you well before they even talk to you. And when they talk to you, they're just trying to assess, can I work well with this person? Can I trust this person? Because many times the decisions you're making at that level is not about like, oh, they can't do the task well. It's like, I'm betting on this person to solve this problem. And if I mess up on this hire, it's like on me.
Yeah, especially at startups. You're like in it with these people.
Yeah. And I was the first hire, and like there was no product. The company wasn't even incorporated yet. There was no funding yet. That's a crazy thing to say yes to. It takes a lot of trust on both parties. So there are hard times in startups every day. The way I joke around is I love every second of this job, but some seconds are really hard.
Yeah, some seconds are really long too.
Yeah, some seconds are really, really long as well. It takes a lot of flexibility.
Mark, welcome back on the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast.
So happy to be here again, Ken.
Yeah, we're here in, it's like kind of nice San Francisco right now. It's a little cold for my taste, but it's been amazing.
Sweater weather?
Yes, definite sweater weather. Slightly underpacked, but I think that's okay. All of my friendships and the people that I know here, the community keeps me warm.
There you go. That's all you need in San Francisco.
Exactly. So, a lot has changed since we last had you on the podcast.
Definitely.
And I'm really looking forward to diving into that story. So if I recall correctly, you left your past data science job.
Yep.
You started working at a stealth startup where you're employee number one.
Crazy enough, yep.
And that all happened because of the content you're creating. So
exactly.
I'd love to learn, maybe starting with how you decided that you wanted to change roles. I mean, the company you were at before was something that, if I recall correctly, you quite enjoyed, but even if you enjoy a job, it might be time to make a career change. And I'd love to hear a bit more about that story from you.
Definitely. So my last job, I worked at a company called Humu, HR tech company. And I was in a data science role and actually got all the way up to like a senior data engineer role. So during that time, I found out I was really into data engineering. And what I kind of realized was I loved the people there. It's probably one of the best managers I ever had. Shout out Stephanie. She is amazing. But what I saw was that my data engineering skills were just like not where it needs to be at if I stayed in this role, because there's just some things in tech deck that just weren't prioritized, rightfully so. So I needed to find like a different role where I can like really leverage that data engineering skill set that I built up. And then also we had a change in leadership, and just the culture just changed. And I was like, all right, now's a good time to leave that role. So that was around actually August-ish when I went to the Learn Media kind of meetup, right? And that actually was the kickstart for me thinking I need a different job. My job at Humu was amazing, but I was a little bit coasting. Mm-hmm. And I wanted a larger challenge. And so going to that meetup with you all really just made me think, what am I doing with my life? Like, these people are crushing it. They're actually making it possible to do content as a living, which is like, whoa, that's possible. I met people who can actually do that. And so I got more serious with my business On The Mark Data, which is a media company that does just content around data science, and thinking more so of how can I move from being a content creator to a media company that has like multiple media assets under it. And so through that process, I was going strategic, like, well, what I need to do to be successful. And one of the things was like, how can I create a job that like lends to that success, right? And so thus started my job search. I talked to multiple kind of career coaches. One of them was Vin Vishisa, who was a guest on your show before. He's one of my favorite people. Yeah. He's a legend. I recommend him to everyone. He worth every penny I spend with him. Yeah. Because it is really, he just gives me the cheat codes to move forward. And so the cheat code he gave me during that time, I was like, hey, I'm thinking about this career move. Specifically, I wasn't looking for a new role. I was looking for a new leader to work under who can leverage my current skill set and just extract kind of performance out of me, right? And so how do I find that? And that was the question I asked him. And he said, you know what? You just need to do informational interviews with them. They'll be like, hey, what are you doing next for your next job? Like, what's your career goals, right? And that's just kind of like to sniff out if I'm on the market. And I'd never done that before. So I was like, Vin knows what's best. So I'm just going to follow that. Then the next question became, well, how do you get in front of leaders? And I just reached out to my network. But the biggest thing was create content that leaders want to be part of. So I started a newsletter called Scaling Data Ops, where I talk to CEOs, CTOs, heads of data, wherever it may be, about the challenges of scaling data infrastructure. Because I want to be in data engineering. In addition, want to talk to those leaders. And that kind of kickstarted me on a path where I was like, okay, I'm doing these user interviews. I see this problem that I experienced both at home, seeing other companies experience for this technical problem of data quality. I had kind of multiple options ahead of me. I was like, do I want to start my own company again? Do I potentially want to go into venture capital? Or do I join another startup, right? And I actually went through a whole cycle of different ones. Initially, I thought, hey, why don't I just consider this trying to start a company thing again? I'm talking to these leaders, I'm seeing this pain point, right? And I actually remember one of the leaders I talked to, he was like, well, what do you want to do next? I was like, man, I've been thinking about this idea of like the data producer side and data consumer side just not understanding each other well. And I think there's something I can do to fix that because there's a lot of pain in that, right? And at the same time, he was like, well, if you pursue an idea, you're kind of locked into that for 5 years.
Yeah.
and if you choose the wrong idea, like that won't get you to your goal, right? And so he introduced me to some VC, one of my friends, he introduced me to some VCs, and I talked to VCs. I was like, oh my God, venture capital is where I actually want to be at. So I interviewed for a couple of VC firms and realized, oh wow, this is amazing. This is actually what I want to do because I get work on the seed Series B stage startup area constantly and get work with multiple of them. This seems way better than being a founder. When I interviewed VC firms, I got past the first round because like I had this content, I had like kind of basically deal flow to get these kind of founders on in meetings and stuff like that. But I didn't have the investor experience, and so I couldn't get past the second round. I'm gonna pause real quick right there. I feel like I just rambled and wasn't coherent.
No, that was awesome.
Perfect. Cool.
There was a lot in that story, though. I'd love to dive deeper into a couple of things.
Yeah.
So the first is the sort of move from data science to data engineering.
Yeah.
What was really interesting about data engineering to you? Was it that maybe you felt bottlenecked in your data science work because there were problems upstream, or was it something else altogether?
So the thing that pushed me to that was that there was no data engineers at our company, and we were doing some heavy analytics stuff. And it was just so hard to work with our data, mainly because like our data, we use document stores for that. So you have really nested data, and we use BigQuery. BigQuery allows nested data in the cloud data warehouse quotes. And so that data was just dumped into there. And this is actually really common throughout the entire industry. So it wasn't just the company I was at. And it just made it so hard to analyze and answer basic questions about like, hey, like how many sales, right? I'm just making up things, right? For the sake of it. But like how many sales or like how many users over time, that was really hard to parse out. And so I couldn't do my job as a data scientist well. And then my team, I noticed they were being kind of held back by these processes as well. So I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna fix this. I started fixing our data warehouse. I started fixing our scripts, putting CI/CD in place, creating packages to help better work with our data, and then moving further and further upstream where I was actually fixing and creating ETL pipelines to bring new data assets. And what I realized, like, wow, I really love data engineering. And then also, I don't know, I'm sure you have Joe Reyes on your show.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, Joe's the homie. So Harpreet Sahota used to have these Artists of Data Science happy hours, and Joe would be there almost every week. I would be there almost every week. And I just kept on asking data engineering questions over and over and over again. And he would just patiently answer all of them for me. And that helped me solve the problems I was doing at work. And then I realized, wait, I actually want to be a data engineer. Like, I actually don't care about building models. Cleaning data is way more fun for me than like building an ML model. And parsing out this code and engineering stuff. I actually want to be a data engineer. And so slowly just asked my boss, I was like, hey, I want to go into data engineering. Can you give me more opportunities for this? And my boss, Stephanie, who was amazing, was just like, yeah, of course, I want to support your career. And so she just sent me off on just solving all these data engineering problems within the company, and ended up being extremely, extremely valuable. One challenging thing though with that transition was from being a data scientist, you're kind of like front and center, kind of a star. Like I did this analysis, here's these answers. But when you go to data engineering, you're supporting those all stars, and you take a really behind the scenes approach and became way less visible in the company, right?
Yeah.
But way more impactful because you like 10x people around you.
Yeah.
So that was the interesting transition that I had with that.
Yeah, I think something very interesting about that transition to me is that we see that there's more concreteness and actual solutions that have impact more clearly in data engineering.
Yeah.
So you say, oh, I created this pipeline. It allows these people to do this thing.
Yep.
And that to me is very rewarding, where you say, oh, I've created something that other people are using right now. It's made their lives easier.
Yep.
I think we fall into this, I don't know if it's a trap, but we fall into this scenario in data science where we do work and then people use it for a day and then they never use it again, or it's not what they wanted. There's so much iteration adjustment, and there's iteration in data engineering.
Yeah.
But I think you can more clearly scope data engineering projects. There's more finality, there's more consistency around what's going on.
Definitely.
And a lot of people really relish that. I see a lot of data scientists who are, they think of themselves as problem solvers. And in data engineering, there's more concrete and actualized problems to solve. Whereas in data science, it's more exploratory still. I mean, yes, you can build models, you can train models, you iterate and improve. But a data science model is literally never done. It can always be improved with more time and more effort. And that equation of when should I stop working on a data science problem because I have other things to do, I have to prioritize, is a really difficult and kind of frustrating one. It leaves you sort of unfulfilled.
Definitely.
I would imagine in data engineering and in ML ops, you get a little bit less of that because you're like, oh, I built the data pipeline. In theory, it should scale. In theory, it should continue to produce consistent results unless the data changes.
Yep.
And that's something that I also appreciate, but I still enjoy the open-endedness just a little bit more. It's probably why I haven't transitioned, even though a lot of people are, because there's a ton of opportunity in data engineering. I mean, if you think about what's hedged from a lot of AI, what's hedged from a lot of these things, every model out there needs data and they need it curated in a certain way.
Yeah.
And for better or for worse, that's not a easily solvable problem.
Definitely.
At all.
And one of the key things that really start pushing me to like, why should I make a bet on data engineering for my career beyond me just enjoying it more than data science, was about two-ish years ago, Andrew Ng made the push for data-centric AI, where he was saying like model performance, just like trying to increase the model performance over and over again, that's not giving the most gains. If you just give better data, quality data to these models, you're gonna have a lot more. And so that was before the whole LLM and ChatGPT push.
He saw it coming.
And yeah, of course he saw it coming, right? But when I heard that, I was like, wait, yeah, that's true. Like, if I focus on this upstream issue of solving this data quality and getting these like unique data assets to my stakeholders, that will put me in a way better position of driving value within the company. And now with these large language models, that's even more true. I was talking to some other data scientists, and like some were talking about how like it went from like kind of classical statistics to like classical kind of traditional ML to deep learning, and now everyone's pushing towards like, well, how do I tune LLM models?
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting transition. And when it comes to that, it's actually like, what are the best inputs you can put into those models? By no means an LLM expert. I'll leave it to other people, but that's just kind of the whisperings I've been hearing in the industry.
Yep. Oh, I think about it how I'm using LLMs in my daily life. I've made a lot of content. I have a video coming out, I think next week, about doing a basic project with the help of ChatGPT. And there's very clear parts in that process that are easier to automate, and there are ones that are more difficult to automate.
Yep.
Some of the easiest ones is just model building, parameter tuning. Essentially, you can ask for a grid search and just run everything through it. That problem, in my opinion, is pretty close to being solved. Maybe not at the highest level for Kaggle, but these models do a pretty good job of getting you most of the way there. They also surprisingly do a really good job at data visualization. You have to know what you're building, but I kind of believe now that it doesn't really matter what data visualization packages you use
Yeah.
because I can just type what I want and tell the LLM what package I want it to use, and it literally creates it for me significantly faster and probably better than I could have before. So I'm not saying that problem's solved. You have to know what type of visualization you want. You have to know the specifics of how you want it drawn up, but you can describe that rather than having to implement it. And that makes you able to use any visualization library you want, whatever you like best. You don't have to be stuck in one if it doesn't have specific features that you want. But the thing that's very difficult to, at least for me, I'm also not a data engineer, but what was very difficult for me to integrate was the pipelines to essentially clean the data, also to add a feature engineering step where, okay, if I'm building new features, how do I go about doing that without redundancy and without the pipeline breaking? And then also actually doing the feature engineering, what features do I want to create? It did okay, like, hey, you should make these, but the more creative ones with subject area knowledge were completely overlooked in that scenario. So I'm saying, okay, where can I make the best gains with this? It's not for myself in doing the work. It's not the model training. It's not the data viz, which I thought probably wouldn't ever be abstracted away.
It's wild.
it's what goes into this model, and how do I adjust the features, do those? How do I perhaps like normalize the data in different ways and make it useful to the model? That's where I see the largest returns, and that's crazy to me.
Yeah. And speaking of visualization, I mean, I've been playing around with some of my content. Your content is much more powerful when you're able to have like code examples and things like that. And that used to take so much time. Now you just go to ChatGPT and be like, hey, here's this problem. Here are my constraints. Here's what I want. Can you give me like a fake data set or like fake code example for this? And it just spits it out in minutes. And my content's just gotten way better with that.
I'd like to take a quick second to thank one of our sponsors, Pathrise. Job hunting can be daunting, particularly in today's unpredictable world. Pathrise matches you with a dedicated mentor in your field to provide tailored support throughout your job search journey. From optimizing your resume and application process to mastering your interview skills, their expert guidance prepares you to secure your dream job and to negotiate a competitive salary. The cherry on top is that you don't pay until you secure that high-paying job that you've been aiming for. Don't hesitate. Visit pathrise.com/KenG to get matched with an expert mentor today.
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is brought to you by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z8 workstation. I really love that the Z workstations can come standard with Linux or WSL2, and they can be configured with the Data Science Software Stack Manager. With the Software Stack Manager, you can get right to the work of doing data science on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show.
So I used a package called Manim, which is essentially a vector-based animation platform. So it's used for the 3 Blue 1 Brown, the guy behind that created it, and it's used to create visualizations that move in a really unique way. I've never used it before. I've tried very briefly before, and I was like, this is too much overhead for me to learn.
Yeah.
And now I can just, in ChatGPT, describe what I want, and I made an animation in 20 minutes that probably would have taken me 5 hours to make if I had just gone through the docs and tried to do it myself and think about all the vector math and these types of things.
Yeah.
And that is so unbelievably powerful to me in my capabilities as a creator, as my capabilities as a data scientist, and being able to describe and showcase and make compelling visual work, that I've been very floored with the capabilities. And I was talking to someone whose startup was funded by OpenAI, and he has access to plugins and all these things. And the new plugins sound wild. So you can actually upload an Excel file or CSV.
Whoa.
In the interpreter. It can do all the visualization. It can do and process all of the code and make sure that there are no errors and solve for itself.
Yeah.
And to me, that's kind of stepping on the toes of a lot of the more traditional data work that we
like
have.
business analysts and things like that. Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's going to obsolete them necessarily, but I think that it is definitely going to change how that work is functioning. It's definitely changes how I do my work.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I mean, I'm excited, but I'm also tentative. I have a lot of content coming out around how I think the world's going to change because, I'm not trying to fearmonger. I'm not trying to intimidate people, but it's very clear to me, talking to other data scientists, talking to companies, seeing what's happening in open source, that this is going to disrupt how we function.
Exactly.
And we really need to prepare and think about what the future is like so we can all have a active part in it.
Yeah, last year I went to like a conference at Scale, and they actually had the people from OpenAI there, and then other people from like Google or like very high up who've been working on this for years and hidden, right? And what they've been really describing is that you can think of these large language models, these foundational models, as platforms, where similar to like the App Store or there's like Facebook or thing like that. It's a platform where people leverage these to build businesses on top of.
Interesting.
And so we'll see how that plays out, but that's how they've been framing it from a business perspective, which is really interesting because you think about like how social media as a platform changed our society, how the App Store changed our society, and now this application that's this hypercharged.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think of it globally, you have WeChat in China, you have Ali, whatever the Alibaba infrastructure is. I mean, everything is integrated through those platforms, and I could see a world where that is. In the short term, I very much look at ChatGPT like the best IDE I've ever used.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's a way that I interface with code.
Yeah.
Before we'd have, okay, if you go all the way back, we have zeros and ones, we have machine language, we have early programming languages like C, where a little bit's abstracted away. You have then something a little bit more modern like Java, where more is abstracted. You don't have to allocate memory, for example. And then we have Python, which is a lot closer to a written language. It's very interpretable by a human perspective. And then now, in my opinion, you have ChatGPT, where I can essentially use pseudocode or describe what I want, and it interprets that and translates that into code. So to me, this is the natural progression of programming. Does that mean that programming is no longer here or obsolete? No, it's just we have a different interface and we do it differently than we did before. It was always trending this way, but it just made the colossal leap from having to purely know code to have to know just essentially pseudocode. Like programming now is language agnostic.
Oh yeah.
Which is wild.
It's really wild. And I've been talking to multiple people who are like, I don't know this language, but I was able to build an app with this in like a weekend, right? And that's powerful. So I think like people like listening to this, you're like, oh my God, should I still learn code? I would say yes at a foundational level, but more importantly, learn how to use code as a tool, as it always was, but learn to use code as a tool to solve actual real problems.
Yeah. Well, I was talking to someone last night. So one of my friends, she's a designer, and she basically was saying that she's not needed the software engineers to implement her designs because of ChatGPT. She's not a coder. She's never coded, but she's the one who has the vision and knows what to make. And now she has the tools to actually make it. And I'm a firm believer. I was spent the last week in New York. I was talking with my friend Jeff Lee, and he believes that every data scientist will become a project manager, or product owner, a product manager, or product owner.
That's kind of what the job already is, at least from a startup perspective. I've been doing a lot of product management and stakeholder management and like getting requirement scoping. So yeah, I can totally see that transition.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how long it's going to take. I mean, I still find my programming knowledge and my background very useful. But at the same time, again, I have no clue what's going to happen in 5 years. All I know is that I need to learn these tools. I need to implement them and integrate them as much as I can, because, I mean, I'm doing 3 times the amount of work I was doing before in the same amount of time. And that to me is
wild.
Yeah, it's bananas. But I digress. Let's switch gears a little bit. I want to learn more about how you landed your current role in the stealth startup. That process of building a brand, designing a system to bring you in front of the exact people that you're interested in talking to. Because to me, that's something that is completely overlooked. You're like, a lot of people say, I want a job and I'm going to go all the traditional routes. You essentially inverted that and said, I'm going to bring the job to me or the opportunities to me. Can you walk me through that process?
Yeah, exactly. So kind of the last point I started was that I was interviewing for venture capital firms. I thought, hey, I don't want to be a founder anymore. I actually want to be a VC. And I kept on just getting in the second round denied because they're like, hey, you have this great audience. You understand the space really well in data, but you have no investor experience. You just need to up level a little bit more. So I just found myself, I could have pushed for the VC role, but I was interested, but not a hell yes. And that's not a position I want to be in for a job. And so my next step was, all right, well, I need to go find a leader where I can achieve something really, really impactful, especially tied to revenue, but more importantly, at like a very early startup to show like, if I go to VC, I can help out other founders, right? And so through that process, I started my newsletter to start interviewing people through that. And it served two roles. One, I just do a bunch of user interviews with leaders and build up my network. And I'm planning on doing this for the next few years, and definitely if it works well. But that's just like adding to my network over and over again for every interview I do. And then when I post a newsletter, I'm providing so much value to this leader because I'm getting a lot of visibility. I have like 45K followers on LinkedIn. So like when I plug them, they're like very excited, or like their company they work at, they're very excited and they're thankful. So providing utmost value to these people, and then by providing them value and also giving them a chance to talk to me and learn about my story, they start saying, oh, Mark's actually interested in going to a new job, or like Mark's actually trying to solve this problem. I'm trying to solve this problem. So what I found was when you're trying to get to this next level, so I'm trying to move past like the senior data engineer to like leadership within a startup. It's less about like this application process and more about getting on people's radars. It's a very like social, subtle thing that I just was not aware of. That again, Vin told me to do it, right? So if Vin says it, I do it.
Yeah.
You're about to ask a question?
Yeah, well, so I think that there's something really impactful about connecting to people through value add.
Yeah.
So you're able to help them tell their story. You're able to showcase what they're doing in a positive light.
Yeah.
And they're willing to connect with you, spend their time with you.
Yep.
And
30 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's just like, that just opens up so much doors.
Yeah. And it makes a lot of these people accessible.
Yep.
Which I think is difficult. A lot of people are hard to connect with if you don't have any reason to connect with them. And having a reason to connect with people is half of the game, in my opinion. I mean, even if someone has a podcast with virtually no listeners, let's say they have 10 episodes.
Yep.
I'm still more inclined to connect with them than someone who's just randomly asking for my time.
Yep.
Because, they're putting in work, they clearly care about this. There's a reason for them to make this connection with me outside of just wanting my help with something. There's some mild form of value exchange. And if the podcast is good, if I say something smart, which is rare, but it happens, then we can do something and anything can happen about that. Or some people have just connected me with other people that were interesting.
Exactly.
And that's a positive benefit associated with just, going on any podcast or newsletter is you now have a Rolodex of CEOs that you might connect with another CEO because it could help their business.
And I've done that actually through that. And the main thing is like by building up that network, you're increasing your surface luck area. And many times, especially when you're building your network in a specific industry, when you go to like a conference, you end up running into all of them.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, you know so-and-so. Oh, you know so-and-so. And just,
have you met this guy? Yeah.
Exactly. And it opens up. And the main thing is when you do that, like, yeah, I'm getting help by building up my network, but like the goal in the immediate future, near-term future is like, it's just about them. I just highlight them and their story and providing value to them. And I'm not really asking anything in return. And that makes people very willingness. And to kind of like specifically answer your question, like, what am I actually doing here? It's not like all by chance. Something that I've been really building up a skill on along with my data science skills is building funnels. And many times funnels to me. And so like with my LinkedIn content, I'm building awareness through like my long form content, like the newsletter or my blogs or wherever it may be. I'm building trust and like, hey, this person has expertise. And then finally, like having those meetings with me is like that final stage. And so it's all very intentional steps to like really build up not only my brand, but the On the Mark data brand that I have. specifically to give me access to better opportunities.
I love that intentionality so much. I think that's what almost everyone is missing in their process is, what do I want? Who are the right people or what are the right opportunities to help me get there? And how do I target specifically that? Because if you're just shouting into a tunnel, that doesn't really provide a lot of value. Maybe someone will walk by, maybe someone will hear you. But if you're shouting at a specific person or you're talking on the phone to someone very relevant, that's a different story.
Yeah.
There's so many more things you can do there. I also think it's important to evaluate who you're reaching out to. You've chosen a very specific target market that is important and respected, but not necessarily inaccessible.
Yeah.
So something I think about a lot for my podcast guests is who'd be willing to talk to me. You know, there's guests that I'd love to have. I'd love to have Andrew Ng. I'd love to have Lex Friedman. I'd love to have some of these people that are super high profile.
Yeah.
But the value that I can exchange for them right now, it is not equitable. Like their time is
We'll
frankly,
see next year.
yeah, we'll see. You know, hopefully. I mean,
Lex Friedman, we hope to see you here next time.
but you know, I completely respect that. I mean, I'm working hard to try to improve my content, to improve the quality of conversations, and you know, have wonderful guests like yourself in that are saying really useful things. But if those people aren't accessible, why are they inaccessible to me, right? So they have a very large audience of their own.
Yeah.
That's something. They also are, you know, thought leaders in a space. They probably have a lot of competition for their time. And if you think about your market, you have these CEOs or tech leaders, and they have probably a lot of constraints on their time, but they don't have an audience of their own necessarily. And you can help them build their audience. You can help them expand in that area where that is creating value. And in return, you get the authority that they have or their wisdom and whatever these things might be. And so, you know, obviously I struggle in those, you know, markets where people have both of those things. But on the other hand, you know, there's a lot of opportunity in the market where people only have necessarily one of those things. So for example, a lot of people that I have on the podcast, they have a very large LinkedIn network or YouTube network. And yes, they're somewhat of a thought leader, but they can improve the validity of what they're talking about. They can tell people more about their story. They can get more engagement through talking to me, and I create value on that end, because they're going to come and they're going to say smart things. I can clip them, I can give them to them, or, you know, someone can come and listen to the whole podcast and then say, oh, you know, this person, I loved what they were saying. Now I have more context and I'm going to be a fan for life of this person. And so I'm always thinking about that equation. And, you know, one day, hopefully I can get a couple people that have both of those things. But yeah, I mean, that's something that's the equation that you next have to figure out, is how do you get the high profile people that are also very wise and have really good things to say. And sometimes you just pay money for that.
Exactly.
But sometimes
it's hard.
you can create these relationships just because you have good social skills, just because you have similar interests. And a lot of people are interested in helping other people that they see are similar to them or have a good vision or are willing to do other things for them as well.
And also going after leaders is actually very intentional, because it was kind of like a go-to-market for my kind of media company. Was that this is going to be my first media asset. So who do I go after? Kind of when you're doing content creation, it's like two paths. You can go either, I'm going to go for all the people trying to get into data science, or it is. And that's great because like you get a lot of engagement. But the challenge is that they don't really have much purchasing power. On the other hand, trying to go after leaders is really hard because they don't really engage.
And there's fewer.
There's fewer, and they don't really engage because it sends the signals out to the market, right? And but they have high purchasing power and high decision power. And so choosing to go after leaders, especially for your first kind of media asset, was that it's a small group that I can easily capture because I have connections to that. If I do capture them, they have high purchasing power for if I did want to sell in the future, and they have high decision power. But more importantly is that with every interview, I'm building up like a network, a moat from others, where now I have, with every interview, I have a media asset, I have quotes, I have recordings of all these leaders. I've done about 20 now already. And And now you can create content combining all those thoughts together that no one else has because this is the content that I recorded.
That's awesome. A lot of people don't know this, but that's sort of how I position the podcast. Not necessarily the leaders, but my content on YouTube is mainly for beginners, people earlier in their career, trying to understand how to navigate the field. And then the podcast is more for people who are mid-career, who are actually data scientists, who are trying to make sense of all this stuff. And I think that or anyone really listening, I've kind of gone away from just pure data information. Because I'm much more interested in learning about people and their stories. And I think individual stories of conflict and resolution can be scalable to any job. No matter what domain, no matter what industry you're in. But it might not seem like it, but for me, it's been very intentional as well. As I would like to have a pipeline for people when they enter the field to create value for them, when they're working in the field to create value for them. And then hopefully, most of the people are not at the stage where they'd be progressing to leadership. And that's honestly not something I have maybe the best insight into. Yes, I am a leader at my organization, but I don't think it's necessarily what I'm learning is going to be as scalable to other people right now, because my company is very small. I do very niche work. But it's all about creating value at every step of the life cycle. And you really have to start somewhere.
Definitely. And so this is actually what got me to my next job. Was one of the leaders I interviewed was Chad Sanderson, who has been really focused on data contracts recently. And originally when I was interviewing him, he was working at a company called Convoy. I thought he was going to ask me to go to work at Convoy, which I was like, yes, I would love to. I would love to work under you, right? And so when I interviewed him, I got to learn more about his process and how he's been thinking about this problem, a problem that I was thinking about and like wanted to build a company around potentially as well. And then a few months later, he reaches out. He's like, hey, Mark, I know you're working at this startup. Why don't you go leave that and come work with me? And it was through my content and through my content, I got connected with him. I kept on showing up to help him out his projects. For his newsletter, he promoted my newsletter on his and gave me a lot of followers on there. So we're like both helping each other out content wise. And this is kind of where all the worlds kind of collide, where there's kind of like this perfect opportunity where he wanted me to come on to help out with DevRel, go to market. And so data scientist turned data engineer. That's the problem they're trying to focus on, this relationship between data engineering and data science or software engineering. So I knew both sides. I knew how to build funnels to myself to get people onto websites and do this marketing kind of thing, and thinking strategically like who's my core audience to bring forward. And then also this startup experience where I've tried building companies before. I've interviewed for like VC firms, stuff like that. Like I just been eat and breathe startups. And so he was like, yeah, I want you to be employee one here. This is what we're building. And it was an instant yes for me because it ticked all those boxes. And specifically, he was a leader that I knew was going to push me really hard. And that's exactly kind of what I wanted. And so following the advice of Ben was really just kind of summarize that all together was being intentional about like, what exactly do I want on my next stage? And it wasn't a job title, it was a leader. Being intentional of like, well, what do I really want? Do I want to like be stuck on a problem for years on end, or do I want like variety? Coming to the realization that, okay, I'm not good enough for this next step that I want for being like a top VC firm. I need a little bit more extra skill. And then this opportunity being like, cool, you can go pick up that skill. You can build a portfolio of like success, right? Where you say, I achieved XYZ for this startup at this stage, right? And this person, Chad, was willing to be like, yeah, I've done all that stuff before. I'm happy to help you learn that as well. And it was like a no-brainer for me. And like, it's so perfect for me that actually like, I've been talking about on the mark data. I actually don't work on that much anymore. I still do a little bit for my content, but my main focus has just been on the startup because it's such a great opportunity.
That's awesome. And something I'm particularly interested in is like, what was the interview process like for that? Was it just like, I've worked with you enough that
there was no interview process. It was just like he just saw me online. He saw how I conducted myself with my content. He saw when he started a community how I just jumped in and helped out. And he knew I was already building this stuff. And like, because I've had like with my content, people already kind of know my professional self really well. And so he didn't need to know anything else. He probably did some extra research outside.
Yeah.
But it was literally like no interview. He was like, this is what I'm doing. Do you want to join it? There's no interview for it. Just show up. Because again, I was employee one. The company wasn't even like set up yet. So like there was no process yet for it. And so he was just like, do you want to join? I was like, yes. And that's typically why I found for startups, especially at that such an early stage, is like you have to move so quickly. And if you find the right people, that you kind of gel with as well. So a lot of it's like, can I just work with this person through very hard times? And you saw how flexible I was with that. And so that was a big value add. So they're just like, yeah, to show up.
Yeah, that's something that I think a lot of people don't realize, is that there are opportunities where if you present yourself well, you build relationships, you create these, you create these systems that you can get in without even having to interview.
Yeah.
And that's something I set aside a long time ago when I left my last job, is that I will never interview for a job again. That's not something I want to do in a formal way. I hate that, the pressure, the way it's structured, where you're kind of, you lay it all out there and undressed, and, and that's, I don't know, a little bit dehumanizing in my personal sense. I just don't like being in that scenario. I like being an authority. I like being able to describe and control the situation rather than be led. And I started building all this content, one, to create value, two, to create something that was my own and that I had control over, but three, if I ever did want to go back and work in industry, that I wouldn't have to interview in the same way ever again. It was just this 3-part hedge that I was making.
Definitely.
And I don't think a lot of people realize how intentional a lot of this stuff is. But if you do have a plan and intention, you can get around a lot of things that most traditional people or traditional approaches don't get around.
Definitely.
I'm not saying I could go into Google or one of these big tech companies and land a job without interviewing, but I would imagine the interview process might be a little bit different even in big companies.
Definitely.
And that's, a lot of people just don't go into these careers sometimes because they don't like that process. It's like, well, there is a third door that you can take. It takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
I probably had to work a lot harder at all the other stuff that I'm doing.
Technically, we've interviewed for like four years straight online.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, think about that. Someone can go and rather than interviewing me, they can watch hundreds of hours of me doing podcasts, hundreds of hours of me making videos, watching me code, watching me do all these other things that would probably be relevant on the job. Do they want to spend time as inefficiently as that? No. Yeah. But they could probably get a better idea about who I am and what I'm about from that than even having a conversation with me.
Yeah.
Because I would hope that I'm very consistent in the podcast, in person, and in my videos across the board. Maybe I'm a little bit more exciting off camera, but or controversial, but I would hope that what you see is what you get from those types of things. And I think you're very much that way as well.
I try, and what I've actually started learning more as I try to move into more of like a leadership role is that, and I don't want to frame it like I'm still learning, so don't take this as like where what I've observed so far is that many times for those roles, when they interview you, it's not about like what you've done. Hopefully you have a really public portfolio or network that can vouch for you, and they'll do their due diligence on you well before they even talk to you. And when they talk to you, they're just trying to assess, can I work well with this person? Can I trust this person? Because many times the decisions you're making at that level is not about like, oh, they can't do the task well. It's like, I'm betting on this person to solve this problem. And if I mess up on this hire, it's like on me.
Yeah, especially at startups. Yeah. In the big companies, it's very focused more on these technical skills.
Yeah.
But in startups, you're like in it with these people.
Yeah. And I was the first hire, and like there was no product. The company wasn't even incorporated yet. There was no funding yet. That's a crazy thing to say yes to. And it takes a lot of trust on both parties. So, that's why I was like specifically like, what's the type of leader I want to work with, and also like trusting that I will like show up for this type of job, because like there are hard times in startups every day. The way I joke around is that I love every second of this job, but some seconds are really hard.
Yeah, some seconds are really long too.
Yeah, some seconds are really, really long as well. It takes a lot of flexibility, but it's been like a dream job for me, because what's really cool about being kind of employee one and coming in this early is that I've tried building startups. I've gone to like an MVP stage and like try to apply for funding and stuff like that, and it just didn't work out. And then also for like my own small business, I've seen some small success with kind of like how to do sales and all those things. Coming in here is like, this is the spot where I just haven't reached yet, but like literally the right next step afterwards. And now I get to see it off someone else's work. And so I kind of get like this little founder light experience where I get to see what it's like to build a company from the ground up, literally like from the point where we're like, how do we do payroll early? All the way to like now seeing it scale. And also without the pressure of being a founder, which is really nice. And so it's just been a dream opportunity, and just been drinking from the fire hose on like, how do you build a company? How do you even get it started? How do you get people interested? All these different things. It's been really cool to see.
So obviously you're still in stealth.
Yeah.
Do you have any details about when you're going out of stealth, or about the nature of the work? So if I recall correctly, you're focused on this relationship between data scientists and data engineers and improving that relationship. Can you give us any sneak peeks?
Yeah, I can't say. I don't know when we're going to be going out of stealth, unfortunately. And fingers crossed, because I haven't been able to update my LinkedIn yet. So people are like, hey, you're doing On the Mark full time? I'm like, no, not at all. But essentially, the problem we're focused on is this new concept called data contracts. And where the pain point is essentially is, you have data producers, so typically like software engineers or like data engineers or some like other source of data you don't control. And this relationship going to data consumers. So the way you can think about it is, say for instance, you did like data science for like a product, right? Software engineers will create the logs for the product that will be happening in the database. That'll be sent to like BigQuery or something like that, right? And then in the data warehouse side, you have data scientists, data analysts using that data, right? How many times have you had a situation where like data upstream changes, like they add a column where they change a value and it breaks all the dashboards downstream? And then you're spending all this time trying to figure out like, well, what happened here? What broke? Was in the data warehouse? Do I need to go upstream? And so fixing that relationship where it moves from being very opaque of what's happening upstream to actually increasing the communication between both sides and putting guardrails on those data pipelines, saying like, hey, if you make this change to this data pipeline, downstream is going to break all these things. Are you sure you want to make that change, or even preventing it? So you can think of data contracts at a very high level as kind of guardrails and data prevention for your most important data pipelines. And so data contracts wouldn't really want to be utilized for like every data pipeline where it's like exploratory. But say for instance, you had like a machine learning model that was really tied to revenue. And you knew the constraints, what it had to have. You're going to want some guardrails on that to prevent it from breaking, right? But more importantly, if it does break, you want to know who the owners are and how to best resolve and what are the expectations. And so data contracts serve as a way to prevent. And if it's something that can't be prevented yet, because it's just unknown, increase the ability to communicate and allow for you to resolve it with the key people.
That makes so much sense. I'm having PTSD from when I was working at, it's like a mid-growth company. And we'd come in, and in the morning, everything would be down. And we're like, what happened? And they're like, oh, we ran an ETL last night that changed some stuff. And there's just chaos until it gets fixed. And you have to revert, and everyone has to undo the work that they've done. And you have to integrate it differently. You have to like hook up different endpoints. You have to redo a lot of different work. And I was like, man, there's probably a better solution.
I was doing that every other startup I was at before this one. I was dealing with this exact problem. It was so visceral, kind of feeling. So that's why I was thinking about starting a company around it. That would be a whole other thing. But then when Chad was trying to solve it, I was like, I don't need to build a company around this. I can just join him and solve this problem I'm really passionate about. And the thing of like, why did I join a startup so early? Like, what made me feel confident? Like, this is the thing I want to bet on. This data architecture, this data contract architecture thing. Why do I want to bet my career on that? And kind of two things. Was I learned that it wasn't just me feeling this, it was the entire industry. And when I did my interview with Chad for my newsletter, I asked him, like, how do you come to this conclusion? Like, why did you decide this? He did user interviews for like 2 years, talking to people from kind of small startups all the way to big FANG tech companies, asking like, hey, is this a problem we're experiencing? Are you experiencing it too? And everyone was experiencing it at all levels. And that was really powerful. And so that's what kind of de-risked that, is that I knew he did the user interviews that no one else was doing. He understands the problem really well. So even if data contracts was like the wrong solution, which I think is actually the right solution, he knows the problem so well that we could iterate to the right thing, or the right iteration of like data contracts. And why that stuck to me was like the last company I tried to build, we didn't do enough user interviews and we doubled down on the wrong assumptions and we built the wrong product. And then when we went to like Y Combinator and we were interviewing with them, they were like, hey, we would love to add you, but you're a great team, but your TAM is wrong, total addressable market. You said it's 1 billion, it's actually in the 100 millions. And we're like, that's not possible. Like, we did our user interviews, we built the product. And when we actually went and understood that more, they were like, oh my gosh, Y Combinator is right. This business idea sucks. Like, this is not the thing. So we actually stopped the company, or stopped trying to build a company. And that lesson stuck with me of like, you need to do your user interviews. You need to understand the problem very deeply before you try to build a company. And so when I saw Chad did that for like 2 years, I was like, oh, this is like, even though it's risky being the first employee, it's probably one of the least risky kind of startup moves because of how well prepared and intentional they've been up to this point.
Yeah, I think so many startups succeed because, well, overall, not many startups succeed, but the ones that do succeed because they're building a product either for themselves or for a very clear group.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I look at a company I've used recently a lot, Frame.io. You could tell that product was made by people that collaborate on video platforms. So for those that don't know Frame.io, you can upload a video and you can share it and you can comment at timestamps to an editor or whoever you're collaborating with to essentially like tell them what adjustments you'd like made. Very simple concept. I think it came out 3 or 4 years ago and it was just bought for over $1 billion by Adobe. But you can tell that the people that made that were like, oh, we have this problem. This clearly addresses that. And it's a pretty big problem for everyone who's in a similar industry to what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I find that you can either do that or you can interview people, learn the problem really well. Probably two sides of that are also.
Well, they actually built it at their previous company. They built it before, so they've actually built the solution before.
Yeah, just internally, and that's the thing. Same
with
idea,
like open source tools and stuff like that, and then they validated it with this larger market. So I was like, most founders do not do this type of work ahead of time. So it wasn't like me just saying like, hey, we have this idea, we want to try to build it. It was like, no, we have this idea for the past couple of years. We're now ready to build it and actually make it a company. Like, join us on this adventure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these infrastructure tools that are developed that way, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Airflow was made that way. I
think Airflow came out of Airbnb.
Yeah, exactly. That makes sense. Airflow.
Yeah. And I think Kafka, which is like the data streaming, came out of LinkedIn.
Yeah. And so proof of concept, we'll see.
Yeah. So we'll see. It's been a crazy adventure. I've been there for about 2 months now. And officially 2 months. I did work for them for free for a couple of months as well, because again, that's just how startups work. But yeah, it's just like you just move so fast, and there's like no way to stop, and it's just something new every single time. So you gotta really learn how to pace yourself and prioritize.
What surprised you the most?
What surprised me the most? So what surprised me the most was that how going to this role is like very DevRel focused and go to market focused. Like, I actually don't code that much anymore. It's just not really important for my job. But I talk about data strategy and the importance of data architecture a lot. And so even though like I'm coding way less, my technical understanding is just skyrocketing because I'm just thinking critically like how to solve these very hard data engineering problems at multiple companies. So that's been really cool. And then another surprising thing is like, so I've been thinking about like, how do you build a tech stack for like your data, right? That's actually pretty easy compared to building a sales and marketing stack. When you're building a technology stack for like data, there's a lot of open source tools, a lot of developers you can learn, and it is very transparent for pricing. Coming up with the marketing and sales stack was also a data problem where you're like trying to get like, hey, here's all these touch points with our potential customers. We want to give into a data set so we can understand who to target, right? That's really hard. What I found in the industry is it's just multiple different vendors, duct tape and Zapier holding it all together. And trying to come up with a tech stack for marketing was actually way harder than I anticipated. That was actually something really unexpected. So that's the cool thing about working in startups. Like I now moving away from this very technical experience to now like, how do I drive business and revenue? The way I've been joking about it is that I moved from content and vibes with On the Mark data and like my personal brand to like now content and revenue. And that's a completely different beast.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, something to be perfectly honest, with all the advancement in technology, with sort of the direction the world is going, I focused a lot more on monetization more recently. I'm trying to do that in as like reasonable a way as possible.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to start promoting products that I don't believe in or anything like that anytime soon or ever. But you know, that is a very different game than lead generation. That's a very different game.
It's hard.
And you know, I think it's good. I think that's an important skill to develop, but it's a very different ball game than just putting stuff out there. And you see what people really care about.
Yeah.
You see like maybe this doesn't drive or convert in the same way as I thought it would. You know, how do you be honest with yourself and create value for other people? Because a lot of these relationships are like long-term relationships. How do you establish
especially
those?
when you're selling something that is like that requires a very relatively large contract and a long sales cycle, and you're selling to like leaders. So like something that's really hard about this is that for the startup, the main thing is trying to find the right customers to give you feedback to build the right product. Because you can have all these ideas, do these validations, but once you put something in the market, that's when you get real feedback. So the goal is less about revenue, is more so like how do you find the right people to help. And so that's been a really hard process. And then another thing, going to the business side is very intentional because you said like monetization is like really hard, right? I'm trying to build a portfolio of success projects. I can go say, for instance, I want to be a founder again, or I want to go to venture capital. In the startup space, I want to be able to say, I joined a company at this stage. I helped them get X customers through these processes and have Y outcome. That is the kind of talking bit that I am trying to achieve, that I want for like my success portfolio, that I really can't get in any other kind of data science or data engineering job. It's like very specific kind of startup job. And it's intentionally set up for me to be like very competitive for like when I try to go into VC or I try to maybe potentially be a founder again. Because when you're a founder, you have to raise. The type of founding I want to do.
Amazing. Mark, those are all the questions I had. This is awesome. Thanks again for coming in.
Thanks so much, Ken.